Hello. So tonight we're going to be having a go at using our sewing machine, which is the most exciting video of all as far as I'm concerned, what it's all about. So first of all, I'm going to have a little go at threading my machine. As you can see, my sewing machine is a beautiful vintage variety, and there are lots of different types of sewing machine, and they all, as far as I can tell, do similar things underneath and really operate on very similar ways, but yours will be unique to your model, so you absolutely need to look at the instruction manual. That is the best place to start, and it will tell you an awful lot of information in there about different stitches and things like that, but also the basics about how to get your sewing machine working. So I'm going to just show you how I thread mine. Yours will probably be different, but it won't be that much different, just so you get an idea of how it all works. I'm going to turn it on so I can see, because it's got the light, and I'm going to put my spool of thread on the top. So that's like number one thing. And I've got to come over here to my first little loop, number 3 loop, and then I've got to go down here behind this dial, up, over, through top, down through this one, and then there's a cheeky little one which is easy to miss, which is just on top of the needle there, and then finally I'm going to pop it through the eye of the needle. So the top tip here is to cut the thread at a 45-degree angle, pull it through, and then lick your fingers and rub the end of the needle, and your thread should you pop through directly through the needle, and you just pull that out behind you. So every time I do it, I double check that I've got my thread lined up perfectly. So I'm using a decent quality thread. If it's cheap quality or thin thread, it will just break and that will annoy you. So I've got point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, 5, 6, and finally point 7. Another thing to note is that your needle needs to be in the up position, so you just turn the hand wheel towards you and it will come up into the highest position, and from there you can get easy access to the teeny tiny hole to thread it. Next we're going to put the bobbin in. Again, this will be different on different types of machine, but on mine there's a little hole for it in the back just behind the needle. I'm going to pop it in place, and I'm going to click that down, make sure that the thread's in and that it's spinning. Mine tucks out the side like this. And then what you need to do, I didn't discover this for quite a while, is bring the hand wheel towards you. So don't at any point put your foot on the pedal in any of this. In fact, you probably shouldn't have it switched on whilst you're threading the needle. I've only got the light turned on so you can see what I'm doing. Bring the hand wheel towards you, and that'll bring the needle down. Then as it comes up, underneath it will pull up the bobbin thread, and you can just unhook the bobbin thread, bring that through, so now you've got both threads just trailing out the back, all nice and neat out of your way. Right, so the next thing to do is make sure that your stitch is set up correctly, and this is something that you need to double check every time you thread your machine. So you need to check that you've got your sewing machine thread set up correctly, all the points, and that the bobbin's in, and that both are pulled through and coming through nice and easily. And then you need to make sure that the length of your stitch is correct. So I've got a dial here, because we're just going to start with a normal straight stitch, and I can do that from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and that just adjusts the length of the stitch. If I wanted to adjust the width of the stitch, which isn't relevant for a straight stitch, a simple straight stitch, but if I did, and as you can see the needle move across, then again I've got 0 to 4 here, and I can adjust as I put it across the needle moves. Now it's really important that you double check this again every time, because your needle will end up hitting against the foot if you set it incorrectly. So it's just worth checking every time threads are all correct, and that the stitch length and the stitch that you're trying to use is set correctly. So that's length, width And then here you've got the pressure. So you can adjust that by turning the number up to make the pressure heavier, and that makes it harder for the fabric to pass through the machine, or you can adjust it right down to the lower numbers, and that makes it easier for the fabric to pass through the machine. And I'll show you in a second how that affects what you're doing, what you're sewing. When you're ready to sew, you need to make sure that the hand wheel is in the right position, so your needle is up as high as it can go. You want to bring your bit of fabric down, make sure your 2 bits of thread, so your one from your upper thread and also from the lower bobbin, is out the way, out the back. And then you don't want to put the fabric just underneath the needle because it will catch. You want to just put it in a little bit to give it a chance. Otherwise it'll all get matted up at the back and it's really, really frustrating. So I'm just doing a simple straight stitch. This is a woven piece of fabric, so it doesn't have any stretch in it. It's just a piece of plain standard cotton. And I've got my stitch length at 4 and I've got my pressure set at 5. So I'm going to hold on to the tails at the back. I'll put my presser foot down, hold on to the tails at the back, and then I'm going to start going. And you can see, so make sure at this point you come to the end that the needle is fully up, and then just turn the hand wheel towards you, and then just as the needle comes down, that means it's all disengaged underneath. Lift the presser foot up, and then that will allow you to pull the thread straight out without it kind of snagging and doing horrible things. So chop the thread off there. Can you see how this is all puckered? That means that the pressure on the foot is too high, so it's pushing the fabric together, and that's getting this pucker, which in some patterns is really useful because you want to gather your stitches and make a kind of ruffled bit of skirt or something. But when you're trying to adjust your machine and get it set up so that it's doing a proper straight set of stitches, that isn't what you want to see. So we're going to have another go, and this is what you need to do every time. You just need to keep playing until you get it just right. So again, get the bit of fabric so you're about half a centimetre in from the end. Pop your presser foot down, get your tails, make sure they're out the way. And before we start sewing, you need to adjust it. So I'm going to bring it down from 5 down to 3 to see if that helps. Okay, I'm at the end, so I'm going to twist it so it's just popping down again. And that means I can pull the threads out easily. So it's getting a bit better, and you can see, but there's still some puckering. So I'm going to have one more go. I'm going to bring this right down to 1 now. I'm going to pop that in there. Oops, didn't do that quite right. There you go. So you can see this time I've got some nice long straight stitches and there's no puckering in the fabric. So that means that things are looking good. And this is what you have to do every time you try a new piece of fabric. You just have to have a play with your machine and don't be afraid to adjust the dials. Turn it up, have a look, see what happens if it puckers, turn it right down, see how that affects it, because that can send things the other way. And it is about finding that sweet spot, which is about your machine, but also the fabric that you're using and the thickness. So if I were to use 2 layers of this now, this wouldn't be the right pressure for it. I'd need to adjust the pressure again. So yeah, keep playing. So when you're starting and finishing with your straight stitch, because as I said, you need to start just in from the end of the fabric, and of course you want it sewn all the way from the beginning to the end. If you bring your fabric down, pop your presser foot down, and then you can just start going with 1. And then if you, on your machine, there'll be a back stitch option. So again, make sure those tails are out the way and just guide it back to the end of the fabric, and that means it's sewn all the way up to the end, the bit you couldn't get to start, and then you can carry on sewing all the way up along it. And then when you get to the other end, again, you can do a little back stitch, and then again twist the hand reel towards you, and that brings the needle down. Then you can lift your foot up. That means you can pull your fabric out. And essentially what that's done is just given you a little knot at one end, so you don't have to tie it off, and the same at the other. So you've gone right to the edge of the fabric. I could have got even closer then, and it's just knotted it off for you, because you can just snip these away and it's not going to unravel. So to summarise, every time you set your machine up, you want to make sure that it is threaded correctly. So double check that each of the points that it needs to be connected are connected properly and that it is flowing freely. Double check that your bobbin is flowing freely, and make sure that the thread from the bobbin has come up through. Your machine might do that automatically for you. And make sure that all your stitch lengths and widths are correct before you start sewing, and that your pressure is adjusted. You will have to play with the pressure to make sure that it's correct for the fabric you're using. So do that. Make sure when you cut out your patterns, you've always got a scrap of fabric. Just have a good play with it and make sure it's correct for that setup. Don't be afraid. Just have a play. The worst you're going to do is end up with some bits of spare fabric that you're going to have to, recycle somehow. But that's the worst that's going to happen, and it's better to ruin those scraps than it is to ruin your piece that you've just spent half an hour cutting out. So yeah, get trying, have fun.